morning and welcome to the panel discussion on building a better post-COVID future of work. I'm Diaan-Yi Lin from McKinsey Company and I will be your moderator today. Let me introduce our panelists quickly. We have with us Graham Buckley of the International Labour Organization, Albert Kam, the Permanent Secretary from Singapore's Ministry of Manpower, Dr. Ha Thi Minh Dak, Deputy Director General from the Vietnam Ministry of Labour, Invalids and Social Affairs, Linh Dang, the HR Director from Microsoft Singapore, and Shoya Yoshida, the General Secretary from the International Trade Union Confederation for Asia Pacific. Good morning, panelists, and welcome to all our audience. Graham, maybe I can turn it to you by kicking off this discussion. We heard Asada Miyakawa-san share a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 on the labor market in APAC. She talked about the loss in working hours, some of the segments that have been disproportionately affected, for example, women and some of the younger people who've entered the workforce. To prepare for and manage some of these future of work challenges, what recommendations does the ILO have for governments, employers, and workers, particularly areas that the three can be working on together? I think you might just need to take yourself off mute there, Graham.
Yep, thank you very much for the question, and thank you for inviting me to this panel discussion this morning. It's a challenging question. These are challenging times for all of us. I mean, the ILO has, over the last 9-10 months now, been very much promoting the decent work agenda, but more than that, it's about trying to build back better with a human-centered approach, very much building on the centenary declaration that was agreed at the last International Labour Conference in Geneva last year. We're in very much uncharted territory now, so the challenges have been pretty stark for all of us. We're all facing similar challenges, but of course there are also big differences depending on the level of sophistication and development of individual countries, the strength of tripartite structures in individual countries, etc. But the ILO has been promoting a four-pronged policy approach. Firstly, to stimulate the economy and create jobs. Secondly, to support enterprises, the jobs in those enterprises and the livelihoods of those workers in those enterprises. Thirdly, to protect workers in the workplace, and fourthly, to foster social dialogue as the vehicle for effecting those other three areas of the work. Constituents have faced obviously a number of huge challenges in responding to the needs of their membership during these times. But two key messages which I think are very important to convey is the need, one, to work together, both to keep businesses in business and also to protect workers through a whole range of different schemes that have been mentioned, for example, by Asada-san earlier on, workplace retention programs, income support, wage subsidies, etc., etc. One key area of our engagement has been in the field of social protection, and that is often based on social dialogue responses and dialogue between workers, employers, and government about both how to develop new responses to the current crisis and also to take this as an opportunity to strengthen social protection systems, which are often in dire need of being strengthened in a number of countries. Working together, of course, is fundamentally built on the principle of building trust. And that is absolutely essential in these uncertain times. It's an essential, fundamental condition, really, for moving forward. And then second, another recommendation that I would put out there is to encourage governments to show leadership in giving effect to the tripartite institutions and processes that exist in various countries. We all know that this is not always done as effectively and efficiently as it can be, but at these moments of huge uncertainty and crisis, I think this calls for ever stronger collaboration between social partners and government, and I think that governments have a key role to play in ensuring that this takes place, including through the effective implementation of existing labour laws. So those are the two sort of key messages: work together and for government to lead to ensure that tripartite structures and systems are in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Albert, I was wondering if I could perhaps turn to you. Graham mentioned several times some keywords around working together and being collaborative. You had shared earlier in your presentation about how Singapore has responded to the impact of COVID-19 on the labor market. Can you talk a little bit more about how in Singapore you've really leveraged this model of tripartism, of working together to be able to do some of the things in Singapore?
Sure. Thanks, DY. So I think our standard, playbook is really the tripartite process, and I think this is built in peacetime by the tripartite partners interacting very intensively and regularly on a range of issues. So when I spoke earlier about, when we closed off 2019, some of the things that we have achieved, they were not easy differences to bridge. When we had discussed how to raise the retirement and re-employment age, there were concerns on the parts of employers, and also there were concerns on the part of workers. But I think in peacetime, the ability to consistently broker an agreement, reach a compromise, and for the partners to be able to go back and to sell it to their stakeholders as something that is for the greater good makes a lot of difference. So when we found ourselves in the midst of the crisis, I think we were fortunate that the instincts for the tripartite partners to work together were quite current, and they were quite operationally ready, if you like. And so we put them into play. During a crisis, I think various partners, various parties, various quarters would often ask for clarity, and they often ask for certainty. And very often, a big ask of government is to make a law so that it becomes crystal clear and it's black and white. And I think we have tried to apply a certain wisdom in Singapore to decide what really needs to be legislated and what might be better advanced as by way of broad principles. And I think we are able to do that because there is that trust. So we had our tripartite advisory on managing excess manpower. But that's actually quite a difficult construct to agree on, because on the part of the workers, it is accepting that I will have to give up some of the certainty of my wage in exchange for the confidence in my employer that he will steer the company and the business well, and that at the end of this, I will have a job and the business will continue to thrive. And yet at the same time, that is exactly the sort of flexibility that the employers need. We had companies that were seeing an increase in demand, and then we had companies that were losing 90% of their demand. If anyone had attempted to put a number to what the appropriate wage adjustment ought to be, it would likely have satisfied neither. And on the one hand, the company that is still doing all right, the workers would have had to give up when they did not need to. And on the other hand, the company that is really struggling, I think the company would have been at risk of failure. So I think we took a practical approach, but we were able to do it because the trust is forged in peacetime, if you like. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Albert. Dr. Duc, perhaps I could turn to you to share a little bit about Vietnam. You had shared earlier how Vietnam has put out a couple of different sort of schemes in looking to help employers and workers. Are there any things that you would like to see more of, right? Other things that employers and workers really should be doing more of as we prepare for these unprecedented future of work challenges?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I think COVID-19 also triggered a thought that we need to think of the very what about the future of work. When we talk about the future of work before, we often talk about the application and the evolving of the industrial revolution 4.0, about the digital age. But with the comings of the COVID-19, we also see that the world of work is now changing a lot. And we need to think of the new normal things about how to protect our people, but also to help them to improve the skill in coping with the very various situation. For example, they need to work online, they need to work from home, they cannot go to work and at workplace. So I think the most important thing that the government of Vietnam is now doing to work for that is, I think, as other country, and Singapore is also very good at this one, is that we try to build our people ready, including the provision of the skills for the use of the software, for the changing in the way they work. And particularly, we are talking about the more like labor market demands forecast, so that we can see what we need to do from our side, from vocational education and training, from the education itself. And we are now also trying to, as the government of Vietnam consider the HRD is one of the three key issues that we need to have the outbreak, the breakthrough in order to promote the development of the social and economic situation of the country. We invest a lot in the education, in the applications of the ITs. And you know that through the surveys recently organized in July and August 2020 under ASEAN, we have on the HRD readiness, we see that the overall results, responses from 311 valid one from the school, Tibet College and university show that all the future skills have been incorporated in schools curricula at primary, lower and upper secondary levels. And numeracy and literacy skills are the most significant incorporated in the curricula, with 53% of the responses confirming the high and very high degree of incorporation. So it means that we are trying to adopt not only the restructuring the system and the inter-ministry collaboration, but also try to change and renew our training curricula for our future generation. And we also see a very important part of the engagement of the business sector. And we see that with the government of Vietnam also promote diversity of education institution in its business sector through the main education law, including the 2019 education law, 2018 higher education law, and the 2014 vocational education. And the key term is socialization of education, which refers to the participation engagement of individual, organization, community, and businesses. And the engagement of business sector in HRD in 8 forms, 8 types: investor and owner of education institution. Secondly, is provider of scholarship, donor, sponsor for equipment and facilities. And we also, they are work also as collaborator in curriculum development and delivery, skills assessment and examinations, setting skills standard, or they can provide short-term training for teachers, co-supervising of the interns, advisory stakeholder in government, collaborator in the research and development, partner in innovation, and provider of lifelong learning. So I think that's the way we can prepare for our workers and employers in Vietnam to cope with the future of work. Just for your information, you may know that Vietnam is now leading the process of development of the roadmap on the HRD in a changing world of work, human resource development in a changing world of work. That is a realization of a declaration on the human resource development in a changing world of work that adopted by our ASEAN leaders in the 36th ASEAN Summit in June. So I hope from that one, Vietnam not only improve ourselves, but also work with ASEAN and partners in making our people ready for the future. Thank you. Over to you.
Dr. Duke, you raise a good point around sort of regional partnership. We'll come back to that. I'd like to just bring Lin into the conversation. Lin, we've heard a little bit around sort of, you know, what the more macro environment is doing, right? It's a tough time for employers, right? Our previous speakers have spoken about sort of, you know, the additional expected burden and challenges for employers. Can you share a little bit about what you know, Microsoft is doing, how perhaps you and others in the sector are coping, and what would you like to see governments and workers perhaps do to support companies, right? Dr. Duke had already talked about the amount of reskilling that has gone on. Albert had talked about tripartism, right? I'll be interested from your view from the employer perspective.
Great, thanks DY, and it's great to be here with everyone. So you're right, there's just no getting away from the fact that 2020 has been a really tough year. Here at Microsoft, we've really been fortunate and humbled that we've been actually able to help our customers, which includes education institutions, governments, healthcare, large enterprises, small, medium corporations as well, to really keep millions of employees working and students learning during the pandemic. I mean, obviously I come from Microsoft, so I can share that there's been a massive acceleration in the adoption of digital technologies, which helped avoid an even deeper economic and job crisis. So tech tools such as video conferencing, workplace collaboration like we have here at Microsoft with Microsoft Teams, and our cloud platform have allowed people to keep working during this whilst meeting the high standards of security and privacy that's needed in these remote environments. Very early on in the crisis, actually, our CEO, Satya Nadella, said that in this era of remote everything, we've seen about 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months. So obviously since then we've been on a journey to learn from our customers and our own learnings is how we reimagine the future of work. So there's probably a few key points that I did want to call out. The first one is really around productivity. So one of the questions that people had here at Microsoft, even before the pandemic, we really did see this workforce trend of workforces being fluid and flexible. So here at Microsoft, because of our technologies, we're not actually constrained by the construct of a 9-to-5 workday or an office building. But obviously during the pandemic, as more organizations adopted remote work, our latest research actually from Australia found that productivity was 3 times higher in firms that adapted to this remote way of working. And then for organizations that introduced policies such as flexible working hours, initiatives to increase social connectivity, ways to support physical and mental health well-being of workers, actually had better outcomes for productivity and business results. So many of our customers, and obviously ourselves as well, as we've adopted these new technologies, plan to use beyond the current crisis and really embed it into this new way of working, a new way of operating. And we call this sort of a hybrid new model of work that we may hear more of. My second point is really around like innovation. So a culture of innovation is really the ability for organizations to respond quickly to challenges. And as we speak to more and more business leaders, they no longer view innovation as a luxury. It's actually a necessity for survival. And our latest research here in Singapore bears that out, where innovation is a must-have and not just a good to have. So the ability to innovate, as we've seen through the pandemic, is really vital to performance and resilience. And so whilst I've said many organizations have prioritized technology adoption to enable remote working and business continuity, we've seen those who have emerged stronger are the ones who have integrated the ability to innovate into the core of their organization, which is their culture. And so when we talk about a culture of innovation, we really talk about the synergy between 4 things, which is people, processes, data, and technology. And for most organizations that we've been working with, really the 2 key priorities that they would like to take forward is around people and technology. So if I double click into people, it's really having a culture that embraces risk and driving innovation through ongoing learning for the right skills. It's this ability to create an open and inclusive environment to attract the best talent, to retain talent and diversity of talent, and to really integrate workforce innovation efforts to really be crucial to accelerate that transformation. So maybe from an HR lens, it's making sure that the right rewards and incentives infrastructure are set up to encourage innovation. And much like what Dr. Duke said as well, it's really about upskilling to sustain this pace of innovation that we know we'll need. And when we double click into the technology pillar, it's really about investing in tech to digitalize and harness the power of the cloud to really empower workers. So really strengthen the organization's approach to digital transformation, to really allow for simplification, flexibility and agility, which has really come out through the pandemic. And these are through technologies like cloud, AI and machine learning. I mean, that is the future. And I would say the future is now. And at the same time, making sure that cybersecurity is infused into the organization's digital footprint. So if I would say at Microsoft, just going back to your point about the partnership with governments and workers, I mean, it's really essential as we reimagine the future together, is really to talk about skilling. Because much like what Dr. Duke said and Ulrich had mentioned around, is that our LinkedIn data insights shows that big changes are coming in this post-pandemic era. We're going to be bringing large numbers of people into the jobs of tomorrow, and that will require rapid and large-scale efforts to skill and reskill people who are already in the job market and those who are entering it. So for example, and Microsoft is just one company, but we did announce a new global skills initiative with the goal of helping 25 million people get the skills that they need for the jobs that are in demand in this changing economy. So whilst this urgency around skills and building equity and resiliency into the labour markets has always been with us, for a long time actually, for those of us in HR, we know this, we talk about talent shortage, but the pandemic has given us the impetus to really go out and do what needs to be done now. So it's really great an opportunity. And so I think from a viewpoint of an employer like Microsoft, we really look forward to working with governments to, and workers as well, to build, as I think Dr. Duke said, a lifelong learner mindset. Here at Microsoft, we call it a culture of learn it all. And that's really to meet the demands of the future of work where we're seeing it.
Great, thank you, Lynn. And you raised, I think, this question of reskilling, which we'll want to come back to, similar to what Dr. Duke had raised. Yoshida-san, perhaps I could turn to you and change the lens a little bit to that of the workers, right? Are there additional challenges that workers face in preparing for this post-COVID future of work? And how should they work in partnership with governments and employers to address some of these challenges?
Okay, thank you very much, Lin-san. The key challenge or biggest challenge for workers and their trade unions is to make sure that the paradigm shift keeps going in the direction of inclusive and income-led growth, which we have been following for the last more than a decade, since the previous global recession. This pandemic has exposed the flaws of the current economic and social system. We have witnessed how fragile businesses are if relying excessively on demand of the global supply chain and giving less priority to boosting domestic demand. We also have learned how workers, losing their jobs even for only a month, make it impossible to pay for housing, children's education, and even food. First of all, labor market institutions should be strengthened to reverse declining labor share and rising income equality. So HRD policy must focus on improving employability, not the high-level workers, but the employability of lower income and extreme low income group, so as to create larger volume of the middle income, coupled with a fiscal policy for adequate public spending for universal social protection based on the fair taxation. Especially this region, private consumption is a major or biggest economic activity which all economy disproportionately rely on, as workers and their families are essential forces of private consumption with higher propensity to consume. The growth based on debt-driven and labor exploitation and the export-driven economy cannot sustain. And the key to the brighter future work is a social dialogue and tripartite cooperation. But I must conclude, I'm sorry, but I must conclude by saying that the social dialogue, tripartism, is not well functioning in many countries in this region, or even non-existent. So that's why we must still work together to create a stable political climate for social partners to operate without fear of reprisal on the basis of the full recognition of employers' organization and trade unions in compliance with the core labor standard of the ILO. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yoshida-san. There are a couple of themes through the discussions and remarks raised so far, which I wanted to pick up on. The first is around a potential regional framework, right? And Dr. Duke and Albak, maybe this is for you. With technology sort of becoming core to the workplace, and some of the initiatives that each of your individual governments have put into place, do you see room for a more regional sort of framework? And perhaps to pick up on what Yoshida-san was saying, to take this concept of tripartism, strengthen it, make it the foundation of a more regional sort of solution, right? Would be curious on your thoughts on that. But maybe I start with, Dr. Duke, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Eileen, for your very interesting question, but also some easy but difficult to respond. But I would like to mention that in the ASEAN region, in fact, Singapore is very good and the spearheading one with a very good future of work program that you introduced since 2018 with ASEAN. And we also follow that for ASEAN Way. We see that maybe Malaysia also focusing on the green job, and Laos is also leading the process of the informal workers, transition of informal to formal workers. So I think this is the way that the regional action is now focusing in sharing good practice among other ASEAN member states, but also with our international partners, with our donors, and also we try to promote the collective efforts and also the improvements of ASEAN as in general. So in 2020, looking back all of the process with the application, as you see, technologies advance, and also particularly talking of the COVID-19, we see that, okay, this is where we need to focus more in a changing world of work. And we build up the declaration of the HRD declaration based on many of the initiatives before, so that we come up with the declaration adopted by our leaders in 36 ASEAN Summit, as I mentioned. But now ASEAN already, the labor, because the HRD composed of the education, also a labor sector, and also the involvement of the partnership, including the businesses. So we established also the TVET Council, that is a technical educational vocational training council in ASEAN. We are already, the Ministry of Education and Labor in ASEAN just recently adopted the ASEAN roadmap for the implementation of the declaration, where we have 5 outcomes that we want to promote in ASEAN in the future, including cultivated lifelong learning, including the improved inclusiveness in education and employment for all. We have the demand-driven and competencies and qualification that meet the labor market demands. Outcome 4 is a more employment opportunities, better employability, higher quality of jobs, and enterprise competitiveness. And the last outcome is the sound HRD policy and financing. So looking into that one, we want to involve not only the government, we will involve the institutions, education institution, but also the private business sector in the process. So I think with that, many of you also mentioned about the employability of the HRD development. So we need to find the way that we capture and fill in the gaps of the labor market, and also improve the skills of our workers toward like a more competitive ASEAN labor force. So that, and also not only that one, we promote the partnership between ASEAN and our partners in a way that we have a +3 countries cooperation in HRD a lot. We have also Australia, New Zealand, and the EU also working, GIZ also working with us a lot in the both education and labor, and also involvement of the business sector in many of the regional programs. So with all of that action, I think that ASEAN can move further in the center for the cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you. But before I turn it to you, just to make an announcement to our attendees, if you'd like to send any questions through on the chat function, we'll start to answer some of these questions. Albert, sorry, please, over to you.
Thanks, DY. Yeah, indeed, as Duke mentioned, I think the ASEAN Labour Official Circuit, it's quite active in terms of many ideas, and also we've been talking for a couple of years now on how each of us can shoulder a bit of the burden to take the take the agenda forward. So I think Vietnam has led on the TVET Council and Malaysia on green jobs, and I think for Singapore last year we were very honoured that ASEAN also supported this declaration timed together with the centenary, ILO centenary, and I think within that we also recognized that the future of work and reskilling was going to be a huge challenge, and so many of the national programs I think that you see in ASEAN reflect some commonalities, and I think I would like to think that partly that is due to the exchange and the cross fertilization of ideas at the ASEAN governmental level. In the Regional Center for the Future of Work, which I think had its genesis in our Singapore conference last year, I think one of our ambitions and one of our goals is indeed what Yoshida-san talked about. How do we bring more partners together to talk about social dialogue? So that is actually one of the 3 important pillars of the Regional Center for the Future of Work. And I think last year when we were working through what we might start with, we kind of landed on the topic of leadership in tripartism. And looking back, I think this year I would say that I'm very confident that across ASEAN, whether from government, business, or the labor movement, many of our leaders, especially our up-and-coming leaders, will have had many personal stories and leadership lessons that they on their own have learned. And I'm really looking forward to the Regional Center being able to, at some point in the future, bring together young ASEAN tripartite leaders so that together, I think with the sharing, we can build a much stronger foundation into the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Maybe just to change gears a little bit, a question has come through, which I think is an interesting question around mental health. Something that with the use of technology, mental health of workers really has become a little bit in the forefront of work culture today. I know that we're not healthcare professionals on this panel. Curious, and maybe Lin, will start with you from an employer perspective on how do employers, workers, help each other through this difficult situation to particularly address mental health? And then I'd love to open it to the other panelists on, what governments perhaps can do to help remove the stigma of seeking help for mental health. Lin, please.
Thanks, DY. It's a great question, so thank you to the person who asked. But essentially, I mean, I would say that mental health was an issue before COVID anyway. So I think it was the World Economic Forum who said that we were actually losing $1 trillion a year globally because of depressive or anxiety related illnesses due to lost productivity. And that's not even talking to the emotional and human toll of that when we think about that. So I actually think the pandemic has actually given us an opportunity to really bring mental health into the forefront and really talk about that as a cultural aspect as well. So from an employer point of view, we've been driving many initiatives even before COVID, but we certainly saw through COVID when we pulsed our employees was that there were higher levels because of the uncertainty globally. Things like being separated from families or not having certainty on when it was safe and the pressures of lockdown and so on. So one of the things we do talk about here at Microsoft is that it's okay to not be okay. So like most organizations, we have employee assistance programs, but what's really important for us is to create a culture where leaders and leadership are comfortable in sharing their vulnerability and saying to their teams, it's okay to not be okay. And I know that in some countries across Asia, we've been able to accelerate some of that. So in Australia, we have a corporate health, mental health alliance with other corporations. And then some other countries, we're still working through from a cultural nuance, how to approach it. But at the end of the day, we want our employees to feel that this is a workplace where you can talk about how you're doing and that it's okay to not be okay.
Thank you, Lynn, for sharing. I wanted to just throw it open to the panelists, whether anybody had any other views on this very thorny, quite difficult topic of mental health and how we deal with that. Anybody on the panelists, do you want to give this one a shot? It's a tough one. No? All right, I'm gonna, in the spirit of, we're not healthcare professionals, and it's best that we all stick to and focus on areas that we are perhaps skilled to talk about. Dr. Duke, you did want to say something, please.
Thank you, Lily. I think for the mental health, we all see that during the pandemics, the stress, not only at the workplace, but also in the community. Even I can feel that very well in Vietnam, where we don't have so much cases, but people still very afraid of going out, connecting, getting contact to other people. And even if you come to the meetings, you wear the face mask. It's also sometimes that you feel it's not really safe, even you wear that one. So this is even for the color one, but for the blue one, for the workers, they need to work in the manufacturing one. And they also feel like a very close environment, and they need to work very hard for that one. So the mental health is very prominent, and also that, and also another part, we need to think of the migrant worker who work overseas, and even sometimes the health accessibility is also limited, because sometimes some countries may focus in their own citizens, and the spread out of the COVID-19 is sometimes that we could not check on the people, and then the easily connected. So there's also the fear of the overseas worker working in the country destination with some like a very limited healthcare system. So I think that the way, maybe for Vietnam, we try to introduce the rules of the new normal at the workplace, about the social distancing, about the way to contact with others, and even they also provide the health guidance. For example, washing hands all the time to make sure that you are, and even using the alcohol and other things to clean. So I think that maybe that's the way that we make our workers feel safer, and also care by the employers and by the authorities. I think that may also have to reduce the mental health of the people very clearly, and also about the health check, if possible, if the regular health check can be made to the worker, that also help a lot. I think the way we need to live together with COVID-19, we cannot escape from them, but try to minimize and try to make the people feel safer when they come into work. So I think that can also help. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Duke. And the fact that we are talking about this hopefully helps to mainstream the topic. Albert, did you want to make a comment, please?
Yeah, just a short sort of contribution that I think we found that because people were away from the workplace and the opportunities for face-to-face interaction were limited. Actually, it made it that much more difficult for employers, supervisors, etc., to be able to check in on the people. But one of the areas of innovation that we've kind of seen the last few months is how we've turned to electronic methods, whether it's an app to connect and to invite whether through polling, through open invitations to come forward to kind of share the difficulties. And I think we found that at MOM that's been really quite helpful because we are seeing people come forward sooner. So even if it's non-mental health related, maybe the employer is late in paying salaries. We are finding that because we have now multiplied our channels to reach out to workers electronically, that their ability to give us an early alert and our ability to make an early intervention is actually much better now. So in a way, I think that's probably the way ahead, the direction to go. Really, we got to find ways to make it convenient and easy for people who need help of any kind, to be able to make their needs known, and then for us to be able to very quickly, attend to that need. Yes, thank you.
Good. And I think it's an important point, Albert, right? Lynn had talked about how technology has made us more productive, right? But, how do we also use technology in these new channels as, kind of ways to communicate when we cannot be physically close to one another, especially as a way to support another, no matter what the topic, right? Good. Yoshida-san, I apologize. Did you want to make a comment as well? No? Okay. Oh, please, go ahead.
Briefing on the mental health. I'd just like to share some, can you hear me? Okay, I'd just like to share, sorry, my microphone, some information. For example, the ILO is Better Work Indonesia program has developed an online stress management training to create a positive working and living environment for workers and the management of, particularly in the garment industry during this pandemic, And also WHO is providing guidance and advice for health workers, managers of health facilities, people who are looking after children, older adults, people in isolation, and the members of the public more generally to help us look after our mental health. So maybe the government can share this kind of guidance or information with social partners. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Yoshida-san. I'm just conscious of the time and maybe pose a final question to each of our panelists, right? And I'm trying to do an amalgamation of some of the questions that have come up through the chat function here. And perhaps if we can, beginning with yourself, Graham, just to give you a heads up, if we look forward, right? And I don't think anyone knows how long this pandemic will last. And if we did, I'm sure we would all be, probably playing the stock market as opposed to being on this panel. But, your best guesstimate on sort of, what the future could look like. What are one or two things that you'd like this audience to take away, or perhaps for governments to do differently or better? Perhaps just 1, 2 key words of advice of hope that you'd like to leave with this group.
I would say from the outset, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is an opportunity to build back better. So I think that we have, if you like, the tools in place, we have the systems and institutions in place, but it's a question of making them work to deliver on, for example, more effective social dialogue at the workplace. There's a great opportunity, I think, now to strengthen social protection systems, which are often quite weak in many of the countries in the sub-region. So yes, we are responding to a crisis through social protection, but it's also an opportunity to build back stronger, more sustainable social protection institutions. There are lots of other areas as well. For example, we've spoken skills quite extensively. You know, we could perhaps take this as an opportunity to seriously look at the mutual recognition of skills, the portability of skills, etc. But fundamentally, I think, you know, we can reconfigure and rethink about how we are operating in the world of work, and perhaps think about how we can build a more just, socially sustainable, environmentally sustainable, economically sustainable model. And this may be an opportunity that will come out of a crisis in that sense.
Thank you, Graham. Albek, if I could turn to you with the same question.
Thanks. Well, I would say we need to prepare for a marathon, and we are, you know, just in the middle of the marathon. This is not a sprint. We must expect reversals on the public health front. When they come, we must have used the time well to be able to respond and to contain, whatever, you know, the situation we will face at that point. So I think for myself, I would say that, it's a journey. There will be moments of success where we are making progress, but I think all throughout we must remain vigilant, have to keep up the social support, the social compact, because this is going to be a long journey. We have to be prepared for the unexpected. But I think, you know, if this is, you know, like the first break after, you know, the first quarter or the first half, if you like, we have learned enough to know what could work. We have learned enough to know what might be the pathways for us to build, you know, into the future. Technology will be a very important part of it. Skills will be a very important part of it. Assurance to our people will be a very important part of it, including how, you know, they can be supported when they go through periods where, you know, they suffer a loss of employment. So I think, you know, it's really about gearing up as a society for the long haul, and not losing sight, you know, that that's the goal. We are not aiming to be perfect, but I think we must aim to be able to bounce back well. Thank you.
Thanks, Albek. Dr. Duke, same question to you. Some hopes or wishes for the future, or advice?
Yes, I think for the future, like Lim already mentioned, we have the difficulty of maybe even reduce more GDP growth rate. That means that much less employment. Many people would be underemployment. So I agree with our previous speaker that we need to pay attention to social protection. But I think the most important thing is how we scale up the people, our workers, prepare for them for that, working in a new normal way, and the employability very important. Creation of jobs through the development of the businesses. Of course, I think for Vietnam we have sometimes we can sell supply because we can grow we can provide our food from ourselves, but also look into the development of the economy. We need to work with others. I think it changes a lot of experiences, cooperate in the way that we work, like education, training together. Even I think the bilateral agreements or support to each other and the regional action is very important in this regard. So and of course safety for our workers, not only during this COVID-19, but maybe there will be some more epidemics in the future, like WHO has been mentioned. We need to see, I think, some of the action, if we can develop some standard guidelines to support with that one, and defining the functions of different stakeholders, the responsibility of different stakeholders in the process, so that we can try to work and correlate in order to provide, I think, the decent work for our workers in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Duke. Lin, some words of advice of hope for the future.
So I'm an eternal optimist, which is probably one of my weaknesses, but I would say that I think it will come back to what I talked about earlier around people and technology, but strategically, obviously people first. I think we have to have a people first approach to technology. And so whilst we're thinking about reskilling and upskilling people, it's making sure that we're bringing a diverse and inclusive workforce as we create these technologies for right now and for the future. And we've seen the role of technology to help us through the pandemic, but I think the potential there, as you talked about, whether it's around mental health or it's around climate change and sustainability, these are the technologies that will take us into the future. So we have an opportunity now to include all the right people in the conversation as we build for the future.
Thank you. Yoshida-san, the final words from yourself, please.
And a key is a cooperation at the regional level, global level, cooperation among the social partners, as well as the government. And the world is so diversified, particularly our region is diversified, in terms of the advancement of technologies and also the impact of the pandemic, on the economy and employment, and also diversified in terms of the fiscal strength to react, the negative impact of pandemic. So we at ITUC, have proposed to the establishment of so-called Global Social Protection Fund. This is discussed during the G20 Labor and Employment Minister meeting, and also, this will be further developed the forthcoming annual meeting of IMF and the World Bank. So I hope that this global fund will be realized in the very, very near future. Thank you.
Beautifully put, Yoshida-san. Cooperation, where we started the conversation as a panel discussion today around tripartism, a wonderful place for us to end this discussion. If everyone can join me in thanking each of our panelists, thank you all for being a part of this today as we look forward to a post-COVID and a brighter future of work. Thank you all.